Welcome to the Perfect Life Awakening Show, hosted by Royce Morales. Royce has been a transformational facilitator, teaching groundbreaking, spiritually based courses for more than 4 decades. She is the author of 3 books about her teachings. Join Royce as she takes you on a journey into how to live your best life and find your true purpose through discovering the origins of subconscious, disempowering notions and releasing them. She talks with experts and inspiring people just like you who learned to trust their intuitive inner wisdom, which led to life-changing shifts. Today, her guests live an empowered existence and are helping change the world to a higher consciousness place based on truth and love. You deserve to awaken to, align with, and embody your true self and live a life filled with love. Transform yourself from triggered to empowered and create your perfect life. Here is your host, Royce Morales.
Hello, welcome everyone. I am more than excited. I know I always say I'm excited when I start my show, but I'm more than excited today to have somebody really special who's doing so much incredible work for and on this planet. And before I even introduce him, I just want to remind everybody that I am leading a panel discussion on August 8th that's all about awakening. We're calling it Awakening or Remembering. Have we done this already? So set aside August 8th. It's going to be on 10 a.m. Pacific time. And I'll be sending out information about it, but make sure to reserve that spot because it's going to be fascinating. The 3 women that I have with me they all present a different perspective on awakening. What does it really mean? So keep that in mind. So let me introduce James Twyman, my guest today. There's so much that I want to say about him, but let me just kind of boil it down that James Twyman is an international Peace Troubadour, which means that he has gone into war-torn nations with his guitar and his amazing songs and tries to generate peace and understanding and connection and depolarization, which is what he's going to be talking about today, which is a sign of the times that we need to understand depolarization. Why are we so polarized? It's just crazy to me. It's like, hey, we're all humans. We can get along. Anyway, so for 3 decades, he has been a global force for peace, leading millions of people in synchronized meditation around the world. He's a New York Times bestselling author. He's written 24 books, amazing, and he's recorded 22 music albums. And he's all about understanding why we're polarized and what we can do about it, which is his newest book. I just finished reading it and it blew my mind because he traveled across the United States and the world actually and talked to various people about, what's going on? Why can't we connect? And he ended up being connected with some really amazing stories that he shared very openly. So he is turning his focus to the challenges of our time, which, if anybody has been following the news, there are some big challenges going on in our time. So let me introduce you, James. Welcome to my show. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Royce. It's great to be here. I'm excited to talk about this important topic.
Yes. Yeah. I don't think there's anything more important, actually, and it's not just politically, it's personally, it's our relationships, our families, our children. So, yeah, I'm glad you're going to get into that. But first of all, tell us how you got started in all of this. What inspired you to take this route in your life?
This particular route that I write about in the new book or in general?
In general, yeah.
Well, let me look back. Gosh, it's so hard after so much time has gone by to pinpoint. But there are certain moments, I would say, where we make resolute decisions. And I think the most important was when a friend of mine gave me a sheet of paper. It all started with a sheet of paper. that had on it the 12 peace prayers from the 12 major religions of the world. These were prayers that had been prayed in my favorite town in the world, Assisi, Italy, the home of St. Francis, in 1986, when Pope John Paul II called the leaders of the 12 major religions of the world to Assisi, not to discuss or talk or just to pray together. And each one brought the peace prayer from their tradition, and there was a big, beautiful ceremony at the Basilica of Santo Francesco, and each one, beginning with the Dalai Lama for Buddhism, and all the different leaders prayed the peace prayer from their tradition to show that we are all really pointed in the same direction, and that is toward peace. So a few years later, a friend of mine gave me that sheet of paper, and I don't know why she felt inspired to do that, but as I read it later that day, I began to hear music. And because I've been a musician most of my life, I picked up my guitar and just began to play along. And within 1 hour, I had put all 12 of these prayers to music.
Wow.
It was like a miracle, and they were beautiful. So I decided that I wasn't given this just for me, this was something to share. People began calling me the Peace Troubadour, as you mentioned. And at one point, that was in 1994, at one point I felt, well, a peace troubadour should be willing to go to where peace is needed. So I got myself invited to Croatia and Bosnia during the Balkan War. And then many other examples followed, including being invited to Iraq by Saddam Hussein and many other countries. And I realized that in the end, in the beginning, middle, and end, we're all focused on what we really want, which is peace. Now, the way we go about getting that may be dysfunctional,
Yes.
but in the end, when we really come down to it, that is what we all want. So when I put those prayers to music and began sharing them around the world, I realized this is what my life calling was. Of course, many other things have happened, many books, movies, music, but it really does keep coming back to that original call to be like St. Francis of Assisi and to be a troubadour of peace.
Wow. I'm just blown away that you literally went into these countries and gathered people and started singing. What did that look like?
Every situation was different.
Okay.
One example, well, let's begin with when I went to Croatia and then Bosnia in 1995. As I said, I just felt like I should be willing to do this. So I sent out, it was about 90 letters to all the peace and humanitarian organizations that I could find in that whole region. Of course, I think email did exist, but not very many people really had email at that time. So I was literally sending physical letters out. And I got one response, and it was from an organization in a town called Rijeka, Croatia. And before I knew it, I was on my way, and I performed and shared the peace concert and talked about peace for several weeks all throughout the entire Balkan region. So that's one example. I did write my first book, which was called Emissary of Light, from a beautiful, amazing experience that I had when I was there at that time. And I was on a book tour. I was picked up by a major company. I was in the UK on a book tour, and I was on a radio program, and I found out that this particular interviewer, very much unlike you, liked to push and needle his guests and get them to say things that they didn't want to say.
Oh
I
God.
remember sitting in the waiting room, and the people who were on air right before me had stormed out of the studio very upset. So I thought, okay, well, here comes this nice little peace troubadour. What happens? And this was at a time when the U.S. and Iraq and all of the U.S. allies were right on the verge of another war. This was 1998. And I went into the interview, and at one point, this man, whose name was James Whale, I still remember his name, he said, okay, Mr. Peace Troubadour, where does this really hit the road and become real, or is it just a bunch of airy-fairy New Age nonsense?
Oh.
I said something that just kind of came out of my mouth. I don't really know why, but I said, what I'd like to do is to go to Iraq and sing the Muslim prayer of peace to Saddam Hussein. Maybe if we pray together, something will happen. What I didn't realize was that the Iraqi ambassador to Great Britain was listening to that interview. And next thing I know, I was on an airplane to Amman, Jordan, and then had to take a 12-hour taxi drive through the desert to get to Baghdad. In fact, I'll tell you the story of my first footsteps in Iraq. The cab pulls up to this beautiful hotel where they were welcoming me, called the El Rashid Hotel. And as I get out, I'm walking through the main entrance, and I notice a huge mosaic on the ground. And in the center of this mosaic, there is the face of a man with a big snarl on his face. And I look and I think, that looks a lot like George Bush Senior. And I look at the bottom and it says in English, in the mosaic, Bush is a criminal.
Oh, wow.
You literally have to walk over George Bush's face to get into this hotel. And that was the beginning. But I found something out in the course of that adventure, performing the peace concert at the National Theater on national television. Afterwards, they had a big party where I was the guest of honor, where all we did was sit around singing Simon and Garfunkel songs. And I realized something very, very important, that we all want the same thing. And as I said, we have dysfunctional ways of getting about that. But if we could just go to the core and remember that even though we're very, I don't know, it's just very difficult for us to really get what we want. We do want the same thing. Here I am in Baghdad with the so-called enemy, and all they really wanted was peace. So there have been many adventures. Every single one of them was a little different, as I mentioned, but each one of them was a profound opportunity, not just to talk about peace, but to find beautiful and creative ways to live into it.
Well, every time you say all we really want is peace, it kind of leads me into reading your book and reading the interaction that you had with people that you found that you completely disagreed with, but you found a way to bridge that, which, hold up your book for a second, because I absolutely adore the title of this book. Your publicist person sent me a copy of that book, and it took me quite a while to pick it up and read it, because I thought, oh, this sounds like it's about relationships. But as I was reading it, I realized how that title arrived and what it really means and the depth of it. I mean, it's so simplistic, but it's so deep at the same time, because if we can just get to those three places, that's when peace will happen. So tell us about that. I mean, I kind of wanted to wait to jump into your book, but tell us about that title, because it's so perfect.
Sure. The title came from a conversation, or I should even say argument, that I had with my younger brother back around the beginning of COVID. I don't remember what we were even arguing about, but at one point I realized he was winning. So I said three things to him. I said, Kenny, I don't know, maybe I love you. And as soon as I said that, he said, don't say that, because as soon as you say that, we can't keep the argument going. He wanted the argument, because it's just part of our relationship, right? And I realized when he said that, it's true. If there's nothing opposing us, there's nothing to push against, we can't continue an argument. So I began talking about this in many of my lectures, and I realized that it was very sticky. Afterwards, I would hear people using it just in the course of their daily conversations, days later. But I had no intention of writing a book. I had written 23 books at that point, and I figured I don't really need to do this anymore. But then many of you I remember on the magazine Om Times, there was an article written about my musical based on the life of St. Francis of Assisi. And I was actually on tour this past September performing that musical on the East Coast of the US. One of the places where I was doing it was in North Conway, New Hampshire. My friend Walt was the sponsor, and Walt and his wife Ann and I went out to dinner the night before. And I found out in the course of the conversation that Ann owns a publishing company called Summit Publishers. And I said to her, I'm not going to write any more books, but if I did, this is the one I would write. And I told her the story about my brother, and I told her about this idea that I had. And she said, if you write that book, I will publish it. I said, okay, I guess I'm going to start writing. And I was traveling in a little camper van. So I went back to my van that night and began writing. The next morning, I went into North Conway to have a cup of coffee. Now, this was right before the presidential election. And in the middle of North Conway, right downtown, there was a man who had a car filled with Trump stickers. And he was carrying a sign that said, vote Trump or else.
I love this story. This is
I
great.
I wasn't sure what the or else was, and I'm looking at him from outside the window where I was sitting. I thought, this is the perfect place to begin. So I went out and I just began a conversation. Now, I'm sure that he realized right away that I was not on the same bandwagon. Many weren't. People who passed him on the street were either honking or lifting a middle finger. And so there was a lot of back and forth going on. He probably figured I was there to confront him, to argue with him, to tell him that he was wrong. But instead of doing that, I just said, tell me more. Why is this important to you? Why do you think that Donald Trump is the person for this job? Even though this is not what I felt, I resisted the urge to step in and say anything other than tell me more. And he did. He began to tell me his ideas, why he thought this was important. And I didn't agree with very much of what he said at all. But I was able, in just asking him that, penetrate something, the need to be right. And this is one of the things I talk about a lot in the book, what I call the real pandemic, which is the pandemic of being right,
Yes.
addiction of being right. And this is, I think, the very core of the issue that we have today. Everybody wants to be right. Everyone thinks they're right for many reasons. And if we agree with that person, we're okay. But if we don't agree with that person, we're pushed out. And instead of trying to convince this man that I was right, I listened to him. Here's the miracle. Because I was willing to do that, he was willing to listen to me. He asked me what I felt. That probably wouldn't have happened if I had not began by listening to him. So this is how the book started. It was on the course of this traveling down the East Coast and then finally back to Portland, Oregon, that I had many, many conversations with people who agreed with me, who disagreed with me. But through it all, with each person, I was able to find a common ground that had very little to do with being right, but being together.
Which is what I love about the title is, I don't know. To have that attitude of, tell me more. Why do you feel this way about Trump? And to come from an attitude of, well, maybe you have something important to say and maybe I need to listen. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the key. The truth is, I don't know.
Right.
Neither do you. None of us do. We don't know anything for sure. We have our opinions. We have what we believe, and that's fine. But maybe if I listen to you, maybe if I give you the space to share, maybe I'll learn something. Maybe we'll begin to shape what I believe. But at the core, at the foundation, we have to have love and respect. Just as I had in that conversation with my younger brother. My younger brother and I, we love to banter and to go back and forth. But for many people, this is very serious. And as we know, people are losing relationships, and even in their own families, people are kicking each other out of their hearts, all because they don't agree.
Yeah.
And we have to come to the point where this polarization, the tension decreases. So this is why I say that what I really want to do is to start a movement of depolarization. a movement of training people to have the tools to go into polarized situations and bring calm, to bring space, to bring love. So one of the things that we did is we set up a website, which is de-polarize.com. So depolarize with a dash. And of course, you can get the book. You can learn some other tools. There is a 1 or 2 minute survey that we invite people to take that is helping us to determine the direction that we should go with this important movement. So I really hope people will join the movement. At the very least, let's come together, those of us who want to find a creative solution so we can begin depolarizing our families, our businesses, our countries, and the entire world.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to me because I'm sitting here thinking, I've always been a pacifist. I went on, Vietnam War protest marches my whole life. Starting at the age of 15, snuck out the door so I didn't tell my mom, and that kind of thing. I was that kind of kid. But I'm thinking as you're talking that kind of like what Mother Teresa said, she doesn't go on anti-war marches, she goes on peace marches. It's that kind of thing. If we're coming from, I'm going to make those people wrong about war, it's never going to resolve. The position that we take is what is important. And when you had that talk with your brother and that man at the coffee shop, and you came from a place of, well, tell me what this is, I think that's just so key,
And it's hard.
Yeah, it is hard.
It's difficult, especially today, because we are so set in our positions. It would have been very easy for me with that man there in North Conway to step in and say, dude, what's with all the signs? Don't you see what you're doing? I get that you believe in this person, but come on. That would have been very easy for me to do. But all it would have done is pushed us further apart.
Yeah.
And that's not the goal today. We have to come closer together. Another one of my very favorite stories in the book came at the expense, I could say, of probably my dearest friend in the world. And her name is Vicky. She lives in New Jersey. And I had a few days off from my tour, so I was going to go spend it with Vicky. And Vicky, by the way, is someone who anyone who knows her will agree she's probably the most loving, deeply spiritual person any of us know. So it was great, with great surprise when I sat down with her that first day, that I realized that she was a very strong MAGA supporter. Wow. How is this possible for someone to be as loving as Vicky and support Donald Trump? It was beyond me. But I held back. I took a deep breath. And instead of jumping on my own opinion, I said, Vicky, tell me more. I admit this is hard for me to believe, but I want to hear why. And so she began to share, and we spent days together talking about this. And with her open heart and her loving way, she explained many things to me that I may or may not have agreed with, but I understood. And it just goes to show that we can keep our hearts open in the midst of all of this. It would have been a shame if I had said to Vicky, someone I've known for over 30 years, Vicky, I don't want you in my life anymore. You're totally wrong. Goodbye. But this is what happens every day.
Yeah.
We're pushing people out just because we don't agree on things like politics. Well, this is what needs to be healed. And we need to begin first with ourselves, look at my own prejudices. Yes. And that's exactly what I had to do. I had to look at the fact that I had a very strong belief that anyone who's smart, anyone who's loving would not vote for Donald Trump. Yeah. And I'm really glad that I was confronted with that, because it's not true. We all have our opinions. We all have our way of looking at things, and we can't villainize or belittle people because of that. We need to go deeper. And the deeper we go, the more we realize once again that we want the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So after the whole conversation with your friend, were you able to say, okay, well, maybe I could vote for Trump? Or
No.
what happened? So you still held your
Yeah,
notions,
yeah.
but
But
okay,
it's softened.
yeah. So
Yeah,
that's
I once again, this is not about us needing to change or
yeah,
change anyone else. If that happens organically, fine. But it didn't inspire me to want to vote for Donald Trump. However, I'll tell you what it did, is that it did allow me to step back and to just let it be,
mm,
to let play out whatever needs to play out. And that is where I find myself today. When I look at the news, I always feel the energy of, oh no, what's happening now?
yeah,
But as soon as I catch that, I take a deep breath and I say, whatever needs to happen now. Maybe this is the very thing that is going to break us through. You know, the tension of a rubber band is greatest right before it breaks,
yes,
before it snaps.
yes,
Maybe there is an entire thought system that is getting ready to snap. The idea that we're separated, the concept of being isolated and alone, that maybe these are the things that maybe this has to happen. And this is where the maybe in the title comes in. Maybe if I just allow whatever is to be, then I'm going to learn something.
yeah,
So it didn't change my opinion, but it softened
mm,
my approach to that opinion.
yeah. I think what you said is really important, and I talk about this a lot in my teachings. That on some level, we've chosen this. You know, we have chosen to go through 8 years of Donald Trump because we need to wake up to something that he's providing for us, whatever that is. You know, I mean, that's why I'm doing this panel discussion called Awakening, because there's so much awakening that's going on in all of us from all of the stuff that's going on that we wouldn't have had the opportunity for. Maybe we would have, but it would have been a lot more subtle. You know, but we need to be beaten over the head sometimes. We really do. It just reminds me of a story. I don't remember who the election was for. It was some presidential election years ago, several decades ago. And I was standing in the voting booth, and I was a staunch liberal, progressive Democrat. And whoever this person was that was running was the complete opposite of everything I stand for. And I'm standing there in the voting booth, and I'm thinking, you know what? It doesn't matter who I vote for, because on a global level, we've already decided who we need on a spiritual level to wake us up and to get us moving and to provide something to trigger us so that, you know, we get to, as you say, get to the point where we know that we all want peace. So I, of course, voted for the Democrat, and of course the Republican won. And it was like, okay, well, that's what we need. That's what we've chosen. That's what we need to go
That's right.
through. So,
There's an interesting chapter that illustrates this. I was visiting two friends of mine in Maine as I traveled, leaving North Conway. I went to visit my friends Lisa Natoli and Bill Free. And that evening we were talking, and Bill, who's very insightful, asked a question: how would a sage vote?
oh yeah,
If they walked into the voting booth, and there it is, okay, how would they vote? What we came to is that they would first enter open, listening for guidance, and then they would follow the guidance that they received in the moment. They would resist the need and the urge that we all have to have preconceived ideas, preconceived judgments of who we support, who we don't support, who we think is right, who we think is wrong. They would resist that, and they would simply enter and say, whatever is in the highest good, guide me.
yeah,
Now, this is hard. This is a challenge because and it comes back to this addiction to being right. We all want to be right. We all think we're right, actually. This is one of the problems. One of the reasons why we think we're right is because all the evidence seems to point toward that. For example, in social media, YouTube, most of these things have algorithms that tell us what we already believe. So if I'm on, let's say, YouTube, and I look up a video on, the anti-vaccine movement, is going to determine, well, this must be what he believes and wants, so I'm going to give him a lot more of that. So all the doctors who believe this, all of the different authorities who support this, it's easy for me now to say I must be right because everyone agrees with me.
Right.
Everyone who's important agrees with me. However, if I had gone onto YouTube and been pro-vaccine, the same thing would have happened. All of the experts who believe that this is what we need would have showed up, and it would have been very easy for me to say, obviously, I'm right.
Yeah.
Because this is what everyone says. Everyone that I believe agrees with me. So it's the agreement, that trying to get people on board with agreement that convinces us that we're right and that everyone else is wrong. And so this pandemic of being right is, I think, the foundation. And that's why the title of the book begins with, I don't know. I don't know if I'm right. For all I know, Donald Trump is the exact person that we need for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Maybe he's going to surprise me and do great things. Maybe the things that he does is going to bring down a particular structure that needs to come down. I don't know, but maybe there's something happening that I can't understand, but I love you and I love Donald Trump and I love everyone who's involved, because love and compassion is the only thing that's going to move us from where we are now to where we need to be as one.
Yes. Well, we need to take a little bit of a break, and I'm talking to James Twyman, and we'll be back, and he's going to talk a little bit more about how to get there, how to get to that place of depolarization. Give us some hints. We'll be right back.
Om Times TV. Do you crave joy but feel stuck? Do you go through life feeling constantly triggered and frustrated? Fear is likely the culprit, and subconscious fear is likely sabotaging you. Perfect Life Awakening is a time-tested, spiritually based approach to inner transformation created by Royce Morales. For over 40 years, she has helped people get to the origins of subconscious fears and ultimately help them find their true purpose and a life full of joy. Sign up for Perfect Life Awakening today at roycemorales.com. You deserve to go from triggered to empowered, shifting your life with Perfect Life Awakening. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
I want to eat apples and bananas. I need to eat apples and bananas. Why can't I eat apples and bananas?
Support the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks to help provide meals to those in need. Join us at feedingamerica.org.
Welcome back. I am talking to James Twyman. He is the author of I Don't Know, Maybe I Love You. I just love that title. I love saying it. It's great. Yeah. So we're talking about depolarizing. I think one of the thoughts that I had as I was reading your book is that some of the stuff that's going on, I keep talking about awakening, but we need to awaken to our shadows, our dark sides, the parts of us that we've suppressed and denied and try to act like we're all happy and whatever. So how do you feel about that in terms of your work? Do you see that that is something that's going on as well?
Oh, it's essential. Whenever I have a judgment about someone and see the error, I'm really only projecting an error that I'm not seeing in myself. We could look at a
Yes.
politician, we could look at our neighbor, our brother, our sister, but this is a rule that is foundational in our spiritual journey. And I often go back to my foundation, my own spiritual hero of St. Francis of Assisi. I am a Franciscan priest, and so Francis has always been the example for me. And probably the one story that has influenced me the most was, I think, is very similar and important to what we're discussing. When Francis tried to end the Crusades by going to the most important Muslim in the world at that time, the Sultan al-Kamil of Egypt, and simply sharing with him his perspective of what Jesus really taught, the message of love. Now, I'll tell you the thing that Francis heard that triggered him. He heard that I don't think the Sultan actually said this, but this was the report at the time, that the Sultan had said that he would give a Byzantine gold coin to any Muslim that brought him the head of a Christian. When Francis heard that,
Wow.
he jumped up and said, "That's where I need to go. That's who I need to visit." And of course, didn't seem very logical to go to the man who wants to cut off his head. But he did. He went. It took him 3 different tries. He went with another one of the brothers named Brother Illuminato. And when they arrived at the fortress of Damietta, when Francis and Illuminato first got to the fortress, they thought that they were Sufis and welcomed them in, only to realize that no, they
Wow.
were not Sufis at all, and they were sentenced to be executed. But the Sultan was so fascinated by this monk, this friar that had gone against everything that seemed like common sense and come to visit him. So Francis and Illuminato spent 2 weeks with the Sultan, as well as with the Sultan's teacher, whose name was the Fakir al-Din al-Farisi, who was the most important Sufi in the world at that time. Francis and this Sufi leader in particular had a very, very deep connection. And they shared the foundations of each of their faiths. They learned from each other. And before long, these so-called enemies had come together and had united in a vision. Now, what happened next is very interesting. Francis left with a peace offer from the Sultan. But the cardinal, whose name was the Cardinal Pelagius, who was in charge of all the Crusaders, rejected it. And that he saw the opening and was just determined to crush the Muslim forces. If the Crusaders were able to cross over the Nile, that's exactly what would have happened. But the Sultan, being very smart, when the Crusaders, the entire army, had come to kind of a low point just before getting to the Nile, he opened up the floodgates and flooded that entire region. And the entire army of the Crusaders was locked in place. The mud, they couldn't move, they couldn't get their horses out, and they were starving. So what did the Sultan do? He could very easily have sent his soldiers in and ended everything right there. But because I really believe that it was because of the influence of St. Francis himself that the Sultan did something very different. He sent in his soldiers to feed them, to take care of these starving, sick Crusaders, the enemy. And when you out-Christian the Christians, there's not much you can do but turn around and go home. And I think there's an important lesson here that we can all learn. Whether we're Christian or whatever tradition we follow, the only real tradition is the tradition of love. And if we can love our enemies, do good to those who hate us, bless those who curse us, as Jesus asked us to do, then the work of depolarization happens on its own. It's not like we have to do certain things. We just have to allow a certain being to take over and to live in a certain way. And if we do that, this really becomes quite simple.
Yes, it is quite simple. It really is. Which is why every time I read the news about some war or some this or that or the other thing, I always think, why? It's so simple. Anyway, that's just me.
I agree.
Yeah. So I know you talk in your book about some techniques that you can use to depolarize relationships. Maybe to make it easier, let's just talk about interpersonal relationships rather than global. So what are some of those techniques? How do you tell people how to do all
Well,
that?
the first step is to watch your own mind. In other words, when you feel something rise that where you want to correct, you want to help someone see the light, whatever it is, notice that and take a deep breath. Don't just jump in, which is what we have a tendency to do. We see someone, we meet someone who has a different belief system, a very different way of being, different politics, whatever it may be. And we want to immediately jump in with our facts, with our ideas, and correct them. So the first step is to slow down, take a deep breath. Remember that it's not about changing someone. And then the second step is to be curious. Curiosity is a powerful tool. If we can, as we said before, begin by asking questions. Why do you believe this? Did something ever happen in your life that led you to believe that? And be honestly curious about that. You're probably going to learn things about that person, even if it's someone that you think you already know, that will surprise you. At the very least, you're going to realize that the distance between you is not as great as it seems. I take my friend Vicky as an example. As I said, Vicky is my best friend. She's been one of my dearest friends for so many years, decades. And when I realized that she was voting in a different way, it seemed just for a moment that there was a Grand Canyon between us. And because I took a pause, that's the key, the pause. In fact, I'll come back to that in a moment. And then be curious, ask her questions, find out more. We realize that we're not quite so far apart as it is. So speaking of the pause, I'll tell you a story of how someone who did this literally saved the world. And I mean this in a very literal way. We would not be here today if there had not been the man I'm going to tell you about, who instead of doing what he was told to do, took a deep breath and paused. Maybe you've heard this story, and I don't know his name, but because I read this many years ago. But this took place in Russia during the Cold War in the early 1980s. There was a Russian missile silo, a nuclear missile silo, and there were two Russian soldiers, officers in this silo who each had a job if word ever came that they were to launch their weapons. And each one of them would turn a key and the war would be on. And as we can surmise, the world would end because there would be hundreds of nuclear explosions and that would be the end of all of us. Well, guess what happened? The order came. And the first man said, okay, he turned his key. And the second man was trained not to question these things. When the order comes, you follow. And instead of doing what he knew he was supposed to do, he took a breath and he said, hold on, let's just pause. The other officer said, what are you doing? I think he held a gun to his head, but he couldn't shoot him because someone's got to turn the key. And he said, you've got to turn the key. This is the order. And the other man said, let's just pause for a moment. Well, in that pause, however many seconds it was, the order came that it was a mistake, that it was a glitch. There was never any reason. Stand down. If they had done what they were trained to do, if that other man had turned that key, all-out nuclear war would have happened. But because he had the insight or the wisdom or the inspiration to just slow it excuse me, I have a cold and it's just getting to my throat. Because he had that inspiration to pause, we're all still here. Well, these other examples aren't as dramatic as that, but they show us the importance of just slowing everything down and taking a moment to listen to the other person, to be curious about why they believe what they believe. And then maybe they're going to ask us what we believe. That's the beautiful thing. If we give them the space, good chance they're going to give us the space. But if we just jump in and say, you're wrong, this is what you should believe, we're going to be at battle and we're never going to get anywhere. And this is the pandemic of being right. And this is what we need to address.
Yeah, yeah. And being right is the core of our primitive consciousness. You know, it's like if we're wrong, it feels like a threat to our survival. So we're talking core issues.
Very important point.
Humans.
That's right. If I'm wrong,
Yeah.
well, guess what? I'm wrong all the time. We all are. I amaze myself sometimes at how wrong I am. I'll give you one funny example, and you may have read this in the book, the very, very last part of the book. I think this is a lesson in just laughing at ourselves. So I live in Mexico, and about an hour and a half from where I live, I have a small cabin in a town called Mazatmitla. And at my cabin, there's a very, very large bathtub. And I had been in this bathtub, an outdoor bathtub, the day before. Everything was working fine. The next day, I had just finished writing the book. I was very excited. I was going to get in my bathtub. I turn on the hot water. I let it run. Nothing happens. So I went and I looked at the propane. I didn't see anything that seemed to be out of place. I went back. Once again, nothing happened. I called up my manager, and she said, well, I don't know, but I'll send out the gas guy. Maybe there's just not enough gas. So the propane guy came. He filled it up. But okay, now I'll turn it on. Nothing. Remember, I just done this the day before, so I knew which was the hot, which was the cold. I for sure had that hot water going. Nothing was happening. And I called up my manager again. I said, I don't know what's wrong here, but you need to send a repairman tomorrow. She said, no problem. I'll do it tomorrow. I went back, and just on an inspiration, I turned the other faucet. Hot water. I thought I knew for sure. I thought I was right, and I wasn't. And I laughed at myself so strong, because that was the perfect story to end this book with. Just because we think we're right does not mean that we don't have still things to learn. And if we laugh at ourselves, even when we realize that we are wrong, then everything gets a lot smoother and calmer, and we get to the end goal much faster.
Yeah. Definitely. That's a great story. Yes. So what about, I know we only have a few minutes here. I don't know, 5 or 6 minutes. Talk to us about empathy, because I think that's a really important point in terms of depolarizing.
Sure.
You know, where does that,
we tend to, once again, only empathize with the people that we agree with or that we like. What if we empathize with the people that we don't agree with? You know, what I suggest for everyone is, find someone that you know you disagree with. Maybe it's someone who voted differently than you, or holds a different political or social opinion than you. Call them up, sit them down, whatever it takes, and have empathy for them. Realize that just because they don't agree with you does not mean that they're wrong or a bad person. Like my friend Vicky, they might be wonderful, giving, loving people. And if you give them the space to explore that, to empathize with them, they're going to give you the same space more than likely. And you're going to come closer together rather than being pulled further apart. So once again, this is about depolarizing. We've been polarized enough. I don't know how much more we can take. And that's why we need a movement of people who are doing just this. So I really hope people will come and join us, go to the website, get the book, whatever it takes. Let's get this movement off the ground, because I think this country and this world need it more than ever before.
That's for sure. So, as you were talking, I'm thinking about a particular person in my life that sounds a lot like your friend Vicky. She's very loving, very giving, very compassionate. You name it, anything that is loving and compassionate, she believes in it. And yet, she is a Donald Trump person. And in order to save our relationship, we've decided to just never talk about politics. How do you feel about just taking that route?
That's a
Just
good place
ignore
to
it.
begin. It may evolve from there where you can begin when the heat comes off, because that's really what keeps us dancing. Is our feet get too
Yeah.
hot, right? And there may come a point when you focus on the things that are more important, and you develop that strong loving care no matter what. That's the key, no matter what. Then the heat diminishes, and you might be able to talk about some of those things, and the need to be right may not be quite as evident. So until that time comes, avoiding that topic is a good idea. When I was driving out to the East Coast to begin that tour, I stopped in Minnesota to visit my father. And my father is about as different from me as a human being can be. And this is one of the ways. He is a very, very strong supporter of Donald Trump, a Republican. And he kept saying, I want to talk about this. I want to know why. And I said, Dad, it's not a good idea. I love you. Let's just avoid that topic. And then he would say one thing that would just trigger me, and I would erupt. So avoiding the topic until the de-escalation has happened, the depolarizing has occurred, is a good idea. But have compassion, have love for that person, because it's the compassion and the love that's going to get us through.
Yes, even those you don't think you can love because they trigger every ounce of you are just reflections of something going on in you. And that's what you were saying before. And that's the core of what I teach. I call it mirroring. So if we're suppressing or denying something about ourselves, we see it in somebody else and it drives us crazy. So yeah, even people that vote for Donald Trump.
And there may be a
So
lot of
there's
people watching this right now who voted for Donald Trump.
yeah,
And it's important to know that we love each other. That I'm not going to
yeah,
throw anyone out of my life based upon silly things. Let's get to the important stuff. And if we can just make
yes,
that the priority, loving one another, like St. Francis did with the Sultan, then the enemy becomes our best friend.
that is true. That's true. So tell us how people reach you, what you'd like people to do, how to get your book, do your little promo
Well,
here.
as I mentioned before, join this movement, become a depolarizer. It begins by going to de-polarize.com, take the 1 or 2 minute long survey, and then get the book. Once again, you can get it on Amazon, or you can get it through the website or anywhere else. The book is fun. I like to write books that keep one engaged. This is a road trip, really. And it's a story that I think you'll really enjoy. More than anything, I hope it will inspire you to find the people in your own life who maybe are different or have a different approach, and find ways to relate to them, to have compassion for them, to begin to come together. And if we can begin to do that in our personal relationships, we can do that in the whole world. You can also go to my personal website, which is jamesftwyman.com. And we hope to see you at another event or an interview sometime in the future.
Yes. Thank you so much, James. This was just delightful. Keep up the good work. Go create peace on the planet from everybody depolarizing from within. And we can do it,
Amen.
definitely. Thank you. Yeah. And you guys can follow me on Royce's Ramblings. That's my Substack article that I put out every week. And I talk a lot about mirrors and peace and all kinds of good stuff. And as I said earlier, make sure to reserve August 8th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We're going to be doing a panel discussion with 3 wonderful, amazing women talking about what is awakening anyway. Thank you so much, and I'll see everybody next Wednesday. Have a great day and a peaceful life.